Um, I've loved animals since I was a little kid, and back in the 50s, the dogs were kept outside, so they were in the basement, and that's where I would sit and pet our dog. And I always had stuffed animals, no dolls, never had dolls. And I had names for all of them, and I didn't have enough stuffed animals, so I also had imaginary animals that I talked to, including my bear, creatively named Brownie. And I wanted to be a vet when I grew up, and my aunt told me girls couldn't be vets, and I didn't know that was going to change by the time I became an adult. So my animal quest has always been a personal one. I love to see animals in the wild, and I grew up in Ohio, and rabbits and squirrels were about it in Ohio. Not much wildlife there. So when I became an adult, and one of my dreams had been to go to the boundary waters of northern Minnesota, where I heard a wolf howl when we were sitting around the fire one night. But my biggest dream was always to go to Alaska. And I finally had the opportunity. I had friends who had worked here in Tucson and moved to Kodiak Island and said, oh, you gotta come. We're not gonna be there forever, so you have to come and visit us. And I had other friends from college who lived in Anchorage. So I saved up a lot of frequent flyer miles. So my partner and I were off to Alaska. And I knew the one thing that I wanted to do there was to see Alaska brown bears. And I did a lot of research and found out that you have to fly somewhere to see the bears, and it's very expensive, like several $100s. But I thought, being the Canadian person that I am, obviously, Adam, I was going to get there, and I was going to find a way. So we went to Anchorage and stayed with friends for a couple days, and then went to Homer, which is absolutely gorgeous. You're looking across Cook Inlet at the glaciers all over the mountains. There are bald eagles everywhere. And our friends in Kodiak had advised us to take the ferry across so we could see even more wildlife. Well, I get seasick, but that's how much I want to see wildlife. I'll get seasick for that. And saw sea otters on the water and lots of different kinds of birds. And I've always loved birds and gone birding a lot too. And we got to Kodiak, and our friend, one of the first things he did was to take us out on a dinghy in the harbor to the little islands there. Well, my various partners in life have always been a little reluctant on my wildlife expeditions, and I like to get up early in the morning and go birding, and my partner worked at newspapers at night, so when I want to go birding in the morning, she wouldn't want to go, but she'd say, oh, if I don't go with you, you're going to see a puffin. So that was our running joke. Well, so our friend Adam took us out in a dinghy to the harbor, to the little islands in the harbor in Kodiak, and we got on one of those little islands and walked over to the edge and looked down, puffins everywhere. So I think she figured she was off the hook to go birding from now on. So I told my friends about wanting to see bears. Well, our one friend was a marine biologist, and she said, there's a float plane pilot who's taken us out to collect specimens, and I know he and his wife do the bear flights. She said, let me talk to him. Well, he agreed to give us the island people's rate, if we didn't tell anybody, of $150 a piece, which is nothing. So the day came, we went down to the dock. We were taking a float plane. We had to put on waders, which not the most attractive clothing that you ever want to wear, but a necessity if you're going to get off a float plane into the ocean, which is what we were about to do. We got on the float plane. There were 5 of us all together, the pilot and his wife, who was the guide, and we flew across Shelikof Strait from Kodiak Island to Katmai National Park and landed in the water on the beach of Katmai. Just the scenery from that perspective is just magnificent. We got out of the float plane and waded through the water up onto the beach, and this was early August, so the salmon were running, and the bears are interested in eating the salmon at that point to fatten themselves up for the winter. Now, to give you a little perspective, Alaskan brown bears are the largest bears in the world other than polar bears. The females can weigh 400 to 800 pounds. The males can weigh 800 to 1,500 pounds, and their peak weight is when they're fattening up for the winter. So we're walking on the beach, and the guy told us, stay close to each other. When we see the bears, don't look them in the eye. So at this point, we haven't seen any bears. We know there are going to be these huge bears. So we get out and we start walking down the beach, and then we see a gigantic male was laying in the surf. And he was laying on his stomach. He thought he was taking a nap, and the surf is just kind of lapping his butt, and he's just laying there, and he kind of looks toward us. He was just massive. She said, well, it's about time for the bears to fish, so there's going to be more bears coming along, so be aware. So we walked around, we could see it was really meadows all around this river delta with the mountains behind them. Again, just really spectacular scenery. And we could see where the bears slept in the grasses, and I reached down and I picked up a lot of hair and put it in my pocket, and when I came back, I showed it to my dogs. The dogs sniffed it. Their hair went up. I mean, it must be hardwired into them primal. They're like, oh my God, and you came back safely? So, and we're seeing footprints everywhere. Cubs' footprints, mother bear footprints, father bear footprints everywhere. So finally we position ourselves along the river, and we wait a little while, and down comes a huge female with a cub, and she starts feeding. And we were maybe from here to the back of the auditorium from these bears. And the female was feeding with one cub. Then a blonde female came down with 2 cubs, and they're catching the salmon and feeding them to the cubs and then eating them themselves. Meanwhile, the male's gotten out on a sandbar. He's caught some salmon, and the eagle is with him on the sandbar, grabbing at the salmon, and the male would kind of lunge toward the eagle like it was a running joke the 2 of them had. Well, while we're watching the bears, I'm shooting with my camera, and still just think, I cannot believe we are this close to these bears. We see somebody come walking way down the beach. And the guide said, well, it could only be one of 2 people, and I could imagine, are there any people here? There's a bear photographer and somebody else. She mentioned a name, didn't mean anything to me. So while we're watching the bears, he keeps walking, walks right between the bears right up to us, and think, oh my God, this guy's going to get us killed. And the guide is rolling her eyes, looking exasperated. He walks up. One of the other people with us starts to make this big fuss over, oh, I read your book, oh. I had no idea who this guy was. I'm watching this giant mother bear, and the baby, her cub, at that point, comes over toward us. And I'm thinking, oh, we're toast now, for sure. And he proceeds to start to explain to us the cub's behavior, that he was probably had, a sibling who had died, and he was lonely, and he wanted to play, and he was looking to play with us. I'm thinking, oh, that's a great idea. And the cub gets maybe about, 15 feet from us, and he raises his paw, and we don't say anything. We're trying not to look at him. He drops down and he starts playing on the ground in the water, like, come on, guys, come on. And I'm still looking at this female, and when I'm looking at her through my camera, it looks like she's charging straight at us. And I take the camera down, and she's got a fish. Okay. So, but it was still, I still think of it as the greatest experience of my life, to be that close to one of the wildest creatures on earth. At that point, the guide said, we need to get going. This guy keeps talking. We have to get going. The tide was coming in, and we had to get on the plane before the tide came in too much. The water was too deep, and we cut it kind of close. If you think wearing hip boots and wading in the water is when you try getting into a float plane when you're not entirely fit. And you have hip boots on, and you're the water's coming in, and we got to get out of here. So we all finally got on the plane, and we took off back across the strait, and the sun was setting as much as it does in Alaska in August. It was absolutely gorgeous. If we looked down, we could see humpback whales below us. It was just paradise. So we get back, and I say to this woman, I said, who was that guy that you were talking to? She goes, oh, that was Timothy Treadwell. And at the time, it didn't mean anything. She said, oh, he lives with the bears every summer, and he's written this book. And I went back and I looked him up on the internet, and the book was pretty savvy, but he'd spent about 10 years living with the bears. Well, this was 2001. For any of you who have seen the documentary Grizzly Man, you know what this story is. In 2003, he was killed by the bears. The only human attack in the 82-year history of Katmai National Park at that point. So the very real enchantment with the wild animals and the danger and the risk, really came home to me when I heard that news. I still look back at it as the greatest experience of my life, and just an incredible coincidence to meet that man there on that beach.